Welcome to Career and Leadership Real Talk, the no-nonsense guide for ambitious managers who want to have more impact and progress their career. I'm Pamela Langan, a job search coach and expert CV writer specialising in helping frustrated professionals land the jobs and pay rises they know they deserve.
And I'm Jackie Jagger, a leadership and mindset coach specialising in helping newly promoted and new to role leaders to avoid the dickhead trap and lead with confidence. Between us, we've helped hundreds of leaders and managers to find new roles, take ownership of their careers, and handle the challenges that job searches and leadership responsibility inevitably bring. And now we're joining forces to share with you what we know has worked for our clients. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode. We are talking today about the scenario where people feel overlooked in their job search as a senior professional. And this has come off the back of Pam becoming a bit of a LinkedIn influencer with some of her recent posts where she's talked about some of her client work and some of the experiences that some of her clients have had. Pam, this has always been coming up, hasn't it, for your clients? But in particular, I think you've seen a lot this year where talented senior people are getting really frustrated in their job search before they come to you because they're just constantly feeling overlooked.
Yeah, and there's a number of reasons why people are feeling overlooked. And I think one of the big things that's coming through is definitely the age thing. Ageism is still alive and well in the job market, even though it shouldn't be. It definitely is. And I think the key thing is understanding how to position yourself once you get to either the senior level or once you become a more mature candidate. Positioning is so important, but what people are doing is applying for jobs the same way they always applied for them. Applying for jobs 6-7 years ago is entirely different to applying for jobs in this market. And I believe it's not that people are necessarily being overlooked. They're just not highlighting the value that they can bring.
It's interesting because people will perceive this depending on different things, won't they? So there's so much talk about the jobs market's terrible at the moment for senior candidates. And when you dig into it, sometimes people are feeling overlooked because they've sent out loads of applications and they're not getting interviews. Sometimes they're getting told that they're overqualified or they're getting feedback, and that's a whole separate conversation that we won't go down that rabbit hole today, that they're not the right fit or that the second candidate just had better qualifications or a better experience profile, even though they knew that from the CV already. So it's feeling like what they're being told is just fobbing them off rather than genuine information. And then you get people that are getting all the way to that final stage and then getting frustrated. So what's the typical profile that you're seeing with your clients?
So I think there's a few different things there as well. So like what you're saying, it's not getting selected for interview is a big one. And then getting into the process. So you do get invited for interview, but you're getting knocked out before you get the offer, or you're getting pipped to the post because somebody else has been able to articulate their experience in a different way or in a better way. And what I'm finding is that it's no longer good enough to just pull in some of the keywords from a job description and think that will get your CV selected. So when it comes to tailoring a CV, people are under the impression that you get the job description, you go through it with a highlighter, you go, what keywords are being talked about here? What kind of language are they using? Let's overlay that on the CV. Let's copy out some of this job ad into my CV because I am going to then increase my chances of getting through the applicant tracking system or getting selected by the human on the other side of that. But actually, that's no longer good enough. It's not helping because all it's doing is it's just taking a few keywords and putting it into your CV. There's no real context behind that. So what I'm encouraging my clients to do is think more about what that company needs, what they might be doing in that role, how they might make an impact in that role, even before they get to interview, even before they've had a conversation. It's like, how can I show that I can add value in this role? And then it's about writing that detail into the CV. That is what's making all of the difference. So you will still obviously have an element of keywords included, but you're also going to have that context. And so many people get caught up with the applicant tracking systems. And in all honesty, at a senior level, you're hardly going to go through an applicant tracking system. And if you get a rejection straight away when you apply for a role, that's a human. That is not the software. That is not the robot. Very rarely is it going to be anything to do with the software or the keywords in your CV. That's the human that's read it and gone, yeah, this person's not right. This person's not aligning for some reason. There's a lot really to unpack with this, but just in those initial stages, it's about making sure that you understand the role that you're applying for, not that you've just read and understood a job description, that you actually understand how that role operates within that company, within that industry, within that sector, and you are then showing what you can bring to the table based on your past experience.
I feel like there's so much to unpack there and so many directions the conversation could go, but I'm mindful that this is one podcast episode and we need to keep focused. So I think it's really interesting hearing you describe that element, because the job search market is not just different to 6 or 7 years ago, but also if within that time frame people have progressed and got promoted and stayed in an organization for a while, then it's also a different market because of the level that you're now at, isn't it? And I think all of those things really play into, you have to learn the way to operate and the way to get noticed for the way that the job market is now, and also the level of candidate that you are now. So what are some of the pieces of advice that people could take if they're feeling this way? If that's what they've been doing, they're a senior experienced professional, they are looking for their next move, and they've been struggling to either get an interview or to progress through the stages, what are some of the kind of simple, practical steps that people could start to take to give themselves a better chance at this level and in this market?
So the first thing is being really honest about how you're positioning yourself. If you're applying for senior leadership roles and you've still got your grad scheme or your initial apprenticeship on that CV, if you've got your GCSEs on there, if you've got key skills and competencies, but you're not really given any context, people tend to put like 10, 12 key skills and competencies, but with no idea as to what level that person can do those things. If you're doing all of that stuff on your CV, or you're not looking at your CV with a recruiter head on or with a hiring manager head on, it's time to do that. It's time to look at your CV and be really honest with yourself and think, okay, if I was recruiting for a senior leader right now, would I be considering this CV? What jumps out at me? What is the value this person can bring? And be really honest with yourself. And I think that's the first step before you do anything. You just need to almost have a look and do that audit on your CV. And then you can start researching and looking at what is expected at this level, in this role, in this industry. And then you can start including that information if it's relevant to you, if you've got those skills. So you almost want to do it in stages. If you just try and do all of this at once, you're just going to end up sat in front of that screen, probably like sitting there for an hour or two and then thinking, forget this, and walking away from it, and then just thinking, job market's rubbish, I'm not going to get anything. So you do need to do it in stages, and you need to take it slow and work through it, and you'll end up with a better CV document that really reflects you. And at this stage, when you're doing the audit and the review, I would really refrain from using any form of AI, because you want to get everything that you've done in there, and you want to make sure that it sounds like you as well.
And I was just thinking and reflecting as you were describing that, because I think often people, and if I take myself back, because I had this exact experience when I wasn't working, I was looking for my next role. I knew that I had loads of value to offer, and I was struggling to find opportunities and to get interviews. And I think one of the things that I always thought was I was looking at my CV and feeling like, oh, that's a decent CV. I feel like that's okay. And what I recognized from what you were describing there is I was comparing my CV and the structure and the way it was written and all of those things to considering the types of CVs that I was used to sifting and filtering when I was hiring. And in reality, what I should have been thinking about is putting myself in the position of that person, not at my level and comparing it to CVs for a more junior role reporting into me, but comparing it to more senior candidates and thinking about what would a CEO expect for a CV for someone at my level. And that just never occurred to me. So I think often people are looking at their CV and struggling to unpick why it's not landing when they're comparing it to the structure and type of CV for a role that would report into them rather than a role that would report to a CEO or an MD or a C-suite or whatever it may be. So what else can people do then if they've looked at their CV and taken those steps? What other aspects are that people need to consider for this level?
So I think the next thing to consider is the interview stage. So once you've got your CV on track and you're starting to demonstrate the value that you bring and you start getting those interview invites coming through, the next thing is thinking about how you are coming across in those interviews. And again, there's so much advice out there, like people saying, don't use the star format, use this format. There's so many different ways that you can answer interview questions. But essentially, what you want to be thinking about is what is going to be the best way for me to tell my story when I'm asked a question. Each answer is going to be story based, regardless of whether it's a competency based question or not. Unless it's a yes or no answer, then you're going to need to give them some evidence. You're going to need to give them some information around how you've done that specific thing. And what people tend to do is fall into the trap of being really prescriptive with the star answers or whatever method they use to answer the questions. And the story isn't in depth. So they're not really showing the value that they bring. They're not really demonstrating that how and, what they can actually bring to the role. They're just thinking, I need to get through this answer really quickly because if we take STAR, for example, it's a really clunky way of answering the questions. And I just want to get through this because it feels awkward. It doesn't feel like a natural way to answer a question, when actually, if you think about it differently, you can really use it to your advantage. And it can also help in the interview, especially if someone's taking notes, especially if somebody is thinking, where is this person up to in the story? If you're using the star format and you're clearly articulating that as you go through the answer, you can make sure that you're ticking all of those boxes as you go through. And the action part is always going to be the most important part of that answer, because that's where you're demonstrating the what and the how that you've done. And what lots of people do, and I see this so often, like I do so many interviews with senior candidates and they rush through and they don't give a real overview of how they've done something. Basically what they're doing is leaving it to chance. They're leaving the interviewer to guess, can this person do this thing to this particular degree, or what level of experience have they got? And that is where people are starting to get overlooked in interviews or pipped to the post, because somebody else is not necessarily better at the job or even more experienced. They've just been able to provide a more in-depth answer and really spell out how they do things, which gives the interviewer confidence that you can come in and hit the ground running in their role.
I think that's such a key point, because again, it's a real difference, isn't it? If you've been recruited at a more junior level and then you're now applying for roles at the level that you're at or aspiring to be promoted, again, that type, if I think about when I've recruited for people at C-suite exec, that very senior level, the type of interview is really very different to the interview for a kind of a mid-manager role where you might have those standard competency-based questions. And so you really have to be able to find your route in to give people what they need without it always being signposted in the way that it is for more junior roles. again, I'm going to ask that question as to whether you agree, because we haven't talked about this, and 9 times out of 10 we do, but we're still looking for a time where we disagree.
No, I do absolutely agree on that point as well, because I think as you move up the ranks within any role, within any company, what you'll always be doing is working on the basis of what you've done and how you did it in the past, not what you need to do and how you need to act moving forward. And if you're recruiting, you're generally recruiting for roles below your current status. So you never really get to experience those interviews or how those more senior candidates come across or how they articulate their experience. So to a point, you're winging it, and you need to learn how to handle those situations, because if you don't learn how to handle those situations, if you don't create a strategy for answering those questions, if you don't learn how to articulate your experience, then you are just going to spend a lot of your time just winging it. And sometimes that'll go in your favor and sometimes it won't. And what I see with lots of senior professionals is when it doesn't go in their favor, it really knocks their confidence and they start to feel bad about themselves. And that's where they start leaning into, it's my age, younger people are getting these roles. And actually, it's not always the case. It's just because you didn't articulate your experience well enough, because you didn't understand how to. And when we go through that and we unpack it and I show them new ways in order to do that, then they go, that is just so simple, and it makes all the difference. And they always say, I wish I would have realized this sooner. And it's, you know what? It's absolutely fine, because you're exactly where you're meant to be right now. And I do believe that is true. We could make our lives so much easier. We could maybe move forward a bit faster if we were open to learning these new things. And it's every time you go into a job search, there's going to be different things that are going on, different things that you need to consider. And every time you do that, you yourself have got more experience, maybe more confident, maybe less confident, maybe you want to go in a different direction. There's always going to be something that you need to learn within that process. And I always say to my clients, like, take your eye off the prize. Like, the whole point of going through this process is to learn. And if you look at this process as a learning process, what can I learn about me, about the process, about other people, about companies? They're the people who end up getting the offers, the people who go into it as a learning experience, the people who go in with their eye on the prize. And it's, I have to get this offer because in a few weeks I'll have run out of my savings. I am now desperate. I need to get this job offer. If you're in that situation, or it could be that you're in a toxic work environment and you're like, I need to get out of here, so I need that offer. When you go into it with that attitude or that frame of mind, what you do is you miss all of the learnings, and there's so many things that you can learn about yourself and about the process. So if you go into it and you go, okay, this whole thing is a learning experience, from updating my CV through to getting that job offer, through to starting in that new role, everything about this is a learning experience. And what am I going to learn and reflect on as I go through this process? And that is where all of that stuff that you learn, you can use that in the future, because you almost create like a little toolkit for yourself. And this is where you can really expand your mind and think of things differently. And rather than just going into this, oh my goodness, the job market is terrible, I'm going to hate every minute of this, it's turn it on its head. The job market, actually, even now when we're recording this podcast, the job market isn't terrible. Actually, the job market's never been terrible. It's just different things are going on in the economy. Yeah, it's harder for some people than others, but I do believe that does come down to positioning. So almost reframe it all and go, okay, let's get stuck in. Let's see what I can learn in this process.
Yeah, and as you were talking, I was reflecting back on that aspect of when people are getting increasingly upset, frustrated, distressed, desperate because money's running out, because they hate where they are, because they just cannot seem to catch a break. I think that's such a difficult situation for people to be in, and it's natural to have those emotive reactions. But I remember back in the days when I used to manage teams that were in sales, and part of one of the phrases that we used to use all the time was nobody likes the smell of desperation. And it's the same when you are selling yourself as a solution for a future employer. If you don't articulate those things, you don't go to interview saying, I'm running out of my redundancy money and I desperately need a job, or I cannot stand working for this toxic boss any longer. I really need to get out of there. But it just colours how you show up when your big priority is to get away from the situation you're in. People just get an underlying read of that, and it takes away. So I think that advice to really focus on the learning and how can you learn to really get the rules of the game and what is required at this level. If people can take nothing else from this episode but take that point of approach it as a learning opportunity, however hard that might feel, then I think that could make a huge difference to people's experience of the job market. So before we come to a close then, are there any final kind of practical points that people really need to be thinking about as they're approaching this type of job search at a senior level?
So I think there's probably loads of stuff, but just to give like a final few things for today's episode, I think building relationships before you need them is key, and something that we massively overlook within any job search, because people are so afraid of networking and they don't prioritize networking, and they feel like they've not got time when their head's down in a job. They've not got time to network, and then they come to job searching and then the first thing they'll say is, I've not got a network. So this is an opportunity now to start thinking about who is in your current network, who's in your network from previous roles, and how can you start building that. And you don't need to spend a crazy amount of time on it, but just keeping in touch with people and creating new relationships means that when you are in job search mode, it's going to be much easier, because there might be some introductions that can happen. They might even be able to tell you about things that are going on. You don't necessarily need to just network when you're job searching. You can start having conversations with people, understanding the roles they're in, understanding the industries, the challenges they're facing. There's loads of different conversations that you can have. And I would definitely recommend starting to build those relationships now, or at least think about building 1 or 2 new relationships over the next few months. And I think finally using your experience as a competitive advantage. So rather than thinking I'm going to be overlooked from an ageism perspective, or I'm overqualified and all of that kind of stuff, almost reframing that and thinking about, okay, what do I actually do for organizations? What is my USP? Where can I add the most value within organizations? How can I drive businesses forward, or how can I make businesses more money? What does that look like? And there's a whole range of things that could be, but it's about thinking about those things, because that is ultimately what you're going to lead with. That's your value proposition. That's where you're going to go forward and say, look, in those networking conversations, in the applications, whatever it is, you can just say, look, I am really good at. And then you can talk about that and own it. Lots of people are really scared, especially at senior levels, about saying they're an expert in anything. Well, lots of people are expert in loads of stuff that they won't admit to. And I think it's time to start realizing where you have the most impact, where you've got the most influence, and owning it. You need to start owning what you can do and what you bring to the table. And as soon as you start doing that, writing your CV from that perspective and also answering interview questions from that perspective, that's where you're going to start getting the offers, the invite, and you will stop being overlooked, because you are coming from an authentic place where you are showing the value that you bring.
And I think it's so key at senior levels, character and what you bring, and that whole just sense that people get of who you are and what you're about is just as important as previous achievements and the things that you can tangibly demonstrate. And organizations desperately need people who can stay calm in a crisis, people who have really strong emotional intelligence, people who can offer respectful challenge to the way that things are done and not go gung-ho and be a bull in a china shop. And all of these things are qualities that I think people don't necessarily reflect and consider. These are some of the things that I bring to the table. So it's not just these are my prior experiences and the job titles I've had and what I've achieved. It's also what are those qualities or characteristics that make you a natural fit for that next role that you are going for. We have covered so much ground today and it's been really whistle stop. If you are listening to this and feeling that you are overlooked in your job search, then Pam is absolutely the wing woman that you want on your side. Do go and connect with her on LinkedIn. But also the advice that we've given in this episode, we both acknowledge is not easy to do under your own steam. So if you are needing additional support, whether that is writing a CV for you that will land you the interview for the roles that you want, or whether that is maybe some coaching to support you with interview prep and being able to shine, or whether that is more around that kind of strategy and how do you pull all of these pieces together, then Pam has options and can work with you to ensure that you are able to navigate your way through and get the opportunities that you really want. So we'll drop the link in the show notes, but do go follow, connect with her on LinkedIn, and please do as well share this, as we always say, with somebody who needs it. I think definitely we both see that this is a scenario that lots of people are feeling and facing at the minute, which is why Pam's LinkedIn posts have gone so bananas in terms of the responses. And if there are topics that we haven't yet covered, then please do let us know. We love to make podcast episodes that are in response to the things that our listeners are experiencing and are really helpful. So please do drop us a message with those. But in the meantime, thank you for listening, and we'll be back next time with another episode.